Happy Wednesday, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining us this evening. It's a very busy time of the year, so we really do appreciate everyone who's able to come in and join us tonight. This is our Men's Hormones webinar hosted by Dr. Matthew Hernandez. And if you've been going about your days feeling like you have low energy, low libido, you're just unsatisfied with some changes in your weight and metabolism, we've got a ton of great information and resources to share with you tonight to hopefully get you feeling like your best self again. So I'm Olivia with Ethos Integrative Medicine. I'll be moderating this webinar. Before we start, please remember to mute your microphones. And if you have any questions, feel free to type them into the chat. We'll be sure to answer them at the end. If you have any specific questions pertaining to your personal care, we cannot address that in our webinar tonight, but I highly recommend scheduling a free 15-minute consultation with Dr. Matt. He'll be able to answer your questions and help you to navigate treatment options. So I'll go over more information about that at the end. I'd like to start off our webinar by introducing our regenerative orthopedic specialist and men's hormone specialist, Dr. Matthew Hernandez. He believes when patients have abundant energy and are free from health limitations, they're really able to live their life to the fullest. So today he'll be diving into how men can optimize their hormones, and yes, not just testosterone, so that they have that abundant energy and stamina to feel their best and live a fulfilling life. So without further ado, I'll let him get started.
Thank you so much for the introduction, Olivia, and thank you for taking the time to watch this webinar. What we're going to be discussing today is part one of a two-part series. And so I'm Dr. Matthew Hernandez. I specialize in men's hormones and treating joint pain as well, as Olivia said. And ultimately what we're going to be diving into is looking into men's health as a whole. And really figuring out how, when we're looking at men's health, different aspects that we need to pay attention to that sometimes are addressed in traditional medical models, and oftentimes are often missed. And so we're going to be kind of going through that. We're going to follow a patient case that is an actual patient that I have, and work and kind of walk, see what we did on the first part of improving his overall health. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started here. And the patient we're going to be discussing, his name is Ken. So I'll give you a brief background on him. Ken is a ER doctor, and he is experiencing trouble losing weight, has low energy, has a very stressful job, and he's having all these issues where he's gained weight over the last several years, quite a bit of weight, and he's wanting to get healthier for his family. And he's done all the things. He's motivated to get healthier. He's working out, he's eating right, doing all these things, and yet he still goes and has trouble losing weight. It's impacted a number of things in his personal life, just with his family, wanting to be a role model for his kids, and showing showing how taking care of your health is important. And he doesn't feel he's able to do that because he's struggling with keeping himself healthy, despite doing all the things that he thinks are the right things to do. And so we're going to dive into his particular case and kind of learn some of the things that are very common that people have, where they go and some things that people do at home, or that they read online and they start to do that sometimes work, sometimes they don't, and we're going to kind of troubleshoot that in Ken's case. So moving on, again, Ken's biggest things are he's having trouble losing weight, he's experiencing fatigue, has low libido, and then he's also having troubles recovering from workouts, and he's experiencing brain fog. And so these are all things that came in, and this is something that these are all symptoms that I typically see for men as well. Maybe not an extensive list like this. Sometimes guys come in just with issues with fatigue. Sometimes they come in with brain fog problems, libido, a combination of these things. And so Ken, unfortunately, was experiencing a bunch of these. And so we'll go into his case a little bit more. Essentially, he's experiencing all these symptoms, and he's left asking, will I have to live like this the rest of my life? Do I have to stop whatever it is. In Ken's particular case, he's one of his biggest things is being able to take vacations with his family. He doesn't have the energy to do it. He doesn't have the motivation to do it. Even talking to his kids at the dinner table, he has trouble focusing just because he has so much brain fog. So it's hard for him to like pay attention to the conversation with his wife, with his kids, all these things, even just with friends. He's left wondering, is this just part of getting old? And then wanting to know, will I ever be able to get back to the way I felt when I was in my 20s or in my 30s, whatever it is. And just wanting to know, am I going to be able to get back to that earlier? And so, or to the way I used to feel. So those are things that Ken's frustrated with, and he's asking himself, trying to figure out, is there a solution for this? So before we jump into the rest of Ken's story, just a little about me. So again, I'm Dr. Matthew Hernandez. I graduated from the Southwest College of Naturopathic Medicine. I'm the co-owner of Ethos Integrative Medicine. I have a podcast called the Ethos Athletes Podcast. Some of what we're going to be discussing, we discuss on that podcast as well. And then I train other medical professionals in regenerative medicine and men's hormones. And I work with active individuals to help them stay active and enjoy life. I've been fortunate to be voted Phoenix Top Doctor in 2018 and in 2020. This is an award that is given basically other doctors. It's a peer vote, so you get voted on by other doctors on who some of the top docs are in Phoenix. And so I was fortunate to be voted on those 2 years. And so that's a little bit about me, and we'll get back to Ken. So oftentimes when men are experiencing what Ken is experiencing, that is known as male hypogonadism, also known as low testosterone. So male hypogonadism is the medical term for it, also known as low testosterone. And it's basically a decreased functional activity of the testes to produce hormone production. So you have decreased hormone production due to decreased functional activity. And the problem that we have to figure out is, or the problem that we're working to solve is, what caused that issue to begin with, and then how do we address it? Now, unfortunately, when we're looking at causes of male hypogonadism, and if you go and Google this, you're going to see that this can be a very severe endocrine disorder if it happens early in childhood. What we're talking about today isn't that particular one. So that's there's primary, secondary male hypogonadism. What we're talking about is the secondary, where it's occurring. What do you call it? Later on in life, different things like that at different areas. And so we're paying attention to that when you have a decrease in testosterone later in life, not when you have it early on in childhood. So this can be seen as early as your 30s. And we start to have, when we hit 30, you start to have a decrease in overall testosterone production. And so this can occur as early as 30. Some men experience it, others don't. Some men experience it later in life, different things like that. And so, when you start to feel symptoms is when we're starting to get concerned with it. There are a lot of things that can contribute to this. So, and some of them are actually speculation. Some things that could be speculation, or that are considered speculation as of right now, is going to be like environmental toxicities. So toxins in the air that we breathe, water we drink, the food that we eat, just general pollution, different things like that. Those can be a contributor to this, or those are thought to be a contributor to this. When you have plastics, so we know plastics, certain plastics are a phytoestrogen. So if you're eating out of, not phytoestrogen, but have like estrogen type properties. So we know when you're eating out of like a microwavable container that's plastic, that can go and some of the chemicals from that plastic can cause estrogen-like effects in men that end up decreasing their testosterone. So there's a number of things that are speculated to contribute to this. And ultimately, working on getting the patient healthier overall is going to be step one of this entire process. And that's what we're discussing today. So how do you know if you have it? Some of the symptoms that you experience are decreased libido and erectile dysfunction. This is actually really common and more common in men than men would like to admit. This usually the number one thing that brings men into my office is this one. Lack of focus, that's another big one. So with lack of focus, we're looking at, again, that brain fog. So they just have trouble focusing throughout the day, and have trouble, if they're working on a given, at work, different things like that, they're working on a project, they're in a conversation, they have trouble being able to focus in on that. So that's another very common one. Depression is a huge one. Decreased muscle mass, constant fatigue is a really big one. Abdominal fat, and then decreased athletic performance. So these are just some of the few symptoms that it can cause. At the end of the day, there are more causes to some of these other things as well, but this is a good place to start in general. For instance, constant fatigue, you could have an issue with testosterone. You could also have an issue with cortisol. You can also have an issue with thyroid hormones. And so we're going to discuss that later to see how they all kind of play with interact with each other. In addition to these symptoms, these symptoms are, obviously what you're feeling. So that's a good indicator that you may have male hypogonadism or low testosterone. But we want to confirm that with testosterone labs or with labs in general. If we don't have the labs to back it up, then it's not, you're essentially going to be putting yourself at risk for a number of things. And so we want to go and pay attention to, are the labs actually, do they validate this thing or these symptoms and the potential cause of it? So that's very important. Oftentimes I've had guys come into my clinic saying that they were told by another doctor that they had low testosterone, and sometimes it's the case, other times it's not. But in all those cases, they were offered testosterone treatment without actually being vetted for it properly. And so that's one of my pet peeves is a lot of men's hormone clinics go straight to giving people testosterone, and it's not always necessary. And so that's something that I get on a soapbox about from time to time. So make sure the labs actually back it up. So problems with the conventional model of treatment. And when I mean by conventional model, I'm talking about traditional medicine. You might go to your insurance-based primary care. You might go to a urologist, an endocrinologist, different things like that, to see if you have low testosterone or if you have any kind of hormone imbalance. And oftentimes, the issues that I run into patients with this are these four reasons. So number one is the conventional model tends to treat on the extremes. So what I mean by that is you'll have some doctors. So let's say you're someone who's experiencing these symptoms, you go to your primary care doctor, and your primary care doctor says, okay, fine, let's go ahead and run testosterone. And your testosterone comes back low, and we'll define what that is later, but it comes back low. Some primary cares will say, okay, well, it doesn't matter if it's low, because the treatment for it is putting you on testosterone therapy. And there's research that shows that testosterone therapy can cause heart disease, it can cause prostate cancer, it can cause all these problems. So we're not going to recommend that you do that. Then there's other times where they may go and say, actually, you know what, let's go and give you testosterone, but we're going to dose it extremely high. And so they, on the other end of the scale, these individuals here will go and give the same dose of testosterone to literally every single person that walks through their door. And it doesn't matter what their level was before they got on the therapy, they all get the same dose. And so in one instance, you have someone who's not willing to use it because of the risk associated with it. On the other side, you have people that are like, don't pay attention to any kind of risk, and they put everyone on the same dosing. So that's very common when it comes to treating men's hormones, is seeing one of those two scenarios. And that's often what comes in when I have a patient that comes in and they've been to other doctors for these problems. That's often what's happened, is one of those two extremes. the next problem I see is someone not being updated on their research. So with most primary care doctors that run to, like, they might run labs to check hormones and everything. And they come back and again, they go and say, well, if you get put on testosterone therapy, it's going to be a problem with, you're going to have an issue with cardiovascular disease or heart disease and cancer, prostate cancer. And there was several research studies years ago that were actually poorly done that showed that. Since then, there's a ton of research that shows that those initial research articles were not correct. So a bunch of research saying it actually protects against cardiovascular disease. It doesn't cause prostate cancer. It can potentially make prostate cancer worse if you already have it, but if you don't have it, it won't cause it. There's research that shows how it improves your chance of getting Alzheimer's disease and your mental cognition. So it decreases your chance of getting that, not improves it. It decreases your chance of getting those things. And so those are, there's so many benefits to having proper testosterone levels. Now, I'm not advocating that everyone gets put on testosterone injections or testosterone therapy. There's ways to increase testosterone, but men in general can benefit from having an increase in testosterone. The next thing is improper workup. So this is a really, really common one. Let's say Ken, our patient, went into his primary care beforehand, and he went and said, okay, doc, I'm not feeling good. Can you run hormones on me? Oftentimes they'll run just testosterone, or if we're talking about thyroid, they'll run just thyroid stimulating hormone, or TSH. They don't do a full picture of all the different hormones that you have. That often leads to doctors missing certain diagnoses and really understanding what the big picture is of your health is going on. And so that's really common, where they go and run labs and they tell the patient, everything's fine. And in reality, they didn't run enough labs to actually accurately say that. And oftentimes when we run labs, we end up finding what was missed. Because at the end of the day, the doctor can go and say, hey, you're fine, but you still feel the way that you do. And so it's our job to go and figure out, why do you still feel that way? If everything is quote unquote fine, there's still something causing you to feel the way that you do. And so that's what we go and look at. And part of that is doing proper lab work to ensure that we make sure we touch all our bases on that part. And the last one is they don't know what else to do. So oftentimes what can happen is a patient might go and say, let's go back to the other extreme of everyone needs to be on testosterone. You go to that clinic that believes that. When they go and put you on testosterone, and let's say you had a fairly high level to begin with, and they put you on it, if you were to go and if they were to overdose you on it, that actually puts you at risk for a number of different things. If they overdose you, that comes back on labs, usually these doctors get really scared and they say, oh, okay, well, never mind, we just need to stop everything. And so you stop it to keep yourself safe, but then you go back to feeling the way that you were before. So you kind of you lost in both instances. You lost because you felt bad to start with. You started this program that didn't take into account your individual needs and your individual lab work. They just put you on a random protocol. And then they made you feel that, you might've felt good, but then they put you at risk for stuff. And then they take you off of it, and now you're left feeling bad. So you just kind of went and ping pong ball back and forth. And then usually they just say at that point, well, testosterone therapy is not for you. You're kind of SOL at that point. So those are the problems with the conventional model. These are all very common for me to see in my practice. I've heard these happen, quite a bit to a number of people. And so part of my job is to go and figure out, okay, how do we go and make sure that these don't happen? And that's essentially what we've built at our practice. So what we're looking at is our approach to men's longevity. And the very first thing that I need to understand as a physician working with a patient is what their goals are. So in the case of their goals, I'm interested in, are you wanting to lose weight? Are you wanting to, improve your libido, get rid of any brain fog? Like, what is it specifically of the symptoms that you're experiencing that we're wanting to get rid of, and that we're wanting to improve on? And keep in mind, as I mentioned before, this is a two-step. There's a process here that I look at. So, when I'm looking at a patient, I'm trying to assess, is there a problem that they have that we need to address? And if so, then we follow this process that I'm going to walk you through today. And then the other one is, there's times when guys come in and their hormones are completely fine. They're just wanting to improve their longevity overall. And they want to make sure that they can stay healthy for as many years as possible. That's another approach. And so there's more, or there's slightly different approaches to that patient versus the one that has several problems that we need to solve. So the other patient is very healthy, everything's in check. What can they do to optimize themselves at that point? And so we use the same techniques and therapies and treatments for both patients, but the focus is different. So we're talking about the first one today, where we're looking at, you have these problems with fatigue, low libido, brain fog, all these things, and we want to walk you through to getting you better so that you can feel like your normal self, the way your normal self should be, and hopefully exceed, feel better than you did before. And so number one is really understanding your goals and getting an understanding of what you're trying to accomplish. Once I know that information and what your general approach is, then we can go and work on that, and work on figuring out, how do we go about moving forward with everything. So the way that I define success overall is the patient seeing improvement in the areas they want? Is improvement being seen in a timely manner? So some guys have the patience of like, yeah, this could be like a 6-month thing that I can wait 6 months to see the end result. And others are like, I need to get fixed right now, like yesterday. And so my job as a physician is to figure out, okay, what is, based on the timeline or based on the goals that you have and how fast you want to get better, I need to go and figure out what that timeline, or how to best address that timeline and get you feeling better within that time period. And so there's multiple tools we can use for that. The next one is, do we have a long-term plan to improve the patient's health? I forgot the apostrophe there, sorry. But do we have a long-term plan to improve the patient's health? And then the last one, and the most important one, is our plan keeping the patient safe? So I can make you feel like $1 million by putting you on a high dose of testosterone, but at what cost is that to you? And so that's something that we always need to pay attention to is are we keeping you safe? Are we mitigating your risk in your health overall? And those are all things that are really important to understand with the treatments that we are doing. So once I understand your goals and we have an idea of what success looks like in that case, then we start assessing the problem. And when we're looking at the problem and how to assess it, there's several things that I look at here. So we're looking at, ultimately, I want to get you to I want to help you get to an optimized place. And optimization means different things for different people. So we define what that looks like. And we do that with a number of different things that we evaluate here. So there's preventative screening, there's exercise, there's nutrition, sleep, hormones, and cell function. Cell function is the step 2 of what I was discussing. So that's everything's perfect. Like, we got everything in a line. You feel fantastic. You want to know, how can you live as long as possible and as healthy as possible? And so that's when we add in that cell function piece, because we need everything else to be working really, really well in order to add that piece in, so that we're really getting the most bang for the buck as we're doing it. So let's look at preventative screening. And going back to Ken, so Ken is 42 years old. He's an ER physician, 5'8", 290 pounds. So, he's definitely overweight. His blood pressure is good, though. Oddly enough, his blood pressure is really good. And it's because he's constantly walking throughout the day. Like at his work, he literally works 24, 48-hour shifts sometimes. And he goes and is constantly walking back and forth. He reported having issues with energy, sleep, libido, stress. And you can see his stress is 10 out of 10. Libido wasn't too bad. Sleep is 4 to 8 hours a night. That varied depending on if he was at work or not. Energy's not great. Trouble losing weight, and then his family history had heart disease and cancer. So again, his goals are to lose weight, improve his overall health, increase his energy. He's done CrossFit 2 times per week. He's done a ketogenic diet, intermittent fasting, other fad diets, so Mediterranean diet, like all paleo, all the things you could think of. And he does take a lot of high quality supplements. Intermittent fasting is one of those things that is really popular. You hear a lot about that in the healthcare or in the health and wellness realm. And it's a fantastic tool to use when it's used properly. And in this case, Ken wasn't using it properly because he wasn't educated on how to use it properly. And so it didn't really help him, which is why he was having trouble with all the stuff. And I mean, it wasn't the only thing, but it was one of the tools that he tried. Oftentimes patients will come into my office and they'll say, I've done all these things and I'm still not better. I'm eating right, working out, I'm taking supplements, I'm doing these things, I'm still not better. What do I need to improve on? And usually they're using the right tools, they're just using them in the wrong way. And so that's my job, is to kind of educate about that part. So that's how we assess the problem. And I'm going to go into that a little bit more in a second. And then selecting therapy is going to be the next thing. So from step 1 to step 3, this is usually a 2-week period in our practice. Understanding your goals and assessing the problem is going to be the first visit that we do in our office. That's our new patient intake. We're discussing all those things. And then we order lab work, and it takes about 2 weeks for us to get all the lab work back at the max. Once we have that information, then we can start really further assessing the problem and having the labs confirm stuff, as well as selecting the appropriate therapies. So if you remember, the very first thing that we discussed was preventative screening. This is really important when we're looking at men's longevity as a whole, because ultimately the top 4 killers of or chronic disease killers in men are heart disease, cancer, metabolic disease, and neurodegenerative disease. These are things that we want to, everyone, I haven't met one person who wants to prevent themselves from experiencing these chronic diseases. And so part of us being able to, really important when we discuss your family history, when we understand your genetics, all those things, then these are things that we're interested in. Being Hispanic, I'm I'm more prone to have heart disease and metabolic disease like diabetes and stuff like that. So those are things that I need to screen based on my genetics and based on my family history. We really tailor these uniquely to every patient and really understand. So in Ken's case, we were interested in heart disease and cancer because that's what was in his family history. And so we go and screen for those things. And you can see down here, his heart disease was from his grandfather. His grandmother had cancer. And so we wanted to look for those things. When we did his preventative screen, I ran what's called an NMR profile. So in Ken's case, what we were doing was an NMR panel, and an NMR panel is a detailed cholesterol panel that tells us gives us a risk of what heart disease is. So in the conventional model, we have an HDL, LDL, cholesterol, and that's what's typically done. And then they'll do triglycerides as well. One of the things that is a strong indicator of heart disease is going to be a small LDL particle test. And what this tells me is, what are the chances of you developing plaques in your arteries that will lead to heart disease? And because small LDL particles are what cause that problem to occur. And so what we're interested in is, what that number is, and then how do we mitigate the risk of that? So in this case, Ken's number was 1,904. You want to be below 527. This is extremely high. So he was at a high risk for cardiovascular disease from that point. When you add an inflammation to small LDL particles, then that is what starts causing plaque buildup. The inflammation aspect is measured using this high sensitive CRP, or a cardiac CRP. And that is, his came at 3.77, which was high as well. You want to be below 1. So with these two numbers here, I know that Ken is at a high risk for heart disease. And then given that he was overweight, I wanted to take a look and see what his insulin level was. And you want this to be around 7 or 8, and he's at 19.2. So he wasn't diabetic based on the rest of the labs, but he was tending towards pre-diabetes at this point, or he's having insulin sensitivity, which will get him to pre-diabetes in a few more years. So these are things that we wanted to assess in his case. The next thing that we wanted to look at was his exercise. So moving on to the next piece, exercise evaluation. These are the things that we're interested in this case. We want to know, is he free from pain when he moves? What's his muscle mass, stability, strength, aerobic function, and anaerobic function? I may not do aerobic and anaerobic function right off the bat with people. That might be if they want to go into like the optimized, I want to get like they're healthy and they want to go and like optimize themselves. But what I want to make sure is, can they move? Are they free from pain when they move? What's their muscle mass? Are they stable and strong when they work out? And at the end of the day, those are important, because if we're having issues where they are unable to be stable, be strong, or have pain when they work out, then we have a problem where they're not able to work out. And so that becomes a barrier for them to get better. So those are important for us to pay attention to. In Ken's case, we had him do a DEXA scan, which measures his muscle mass and it's the most accurate way to measure body composition. So we did that to check how he was doing. He was able to move free from pain. He was stable and strong. I just wanted to get a measurement of his muscle mass so we could track that over time. I didn't include that measurement in here. The next one is going to be nutrition evaluation. So we're interested in macronutrients, food sensitivities, and micronutrients. What we're looking at when I talk about macronutrients, it's how much carbs, protein, and fat you're eating throughout the day. Oftentimes, and if you remember in Ken's case, he was eating really well. He did ketogenic. He did all these like special diets. But ultimately, what was causing his problem, or part of what was causing his problem, was under eating. And that's extremely common with men who are trying to lose weight and have the inability to do so. They're working out perfectly, but they're not eating enough, and it's actually causing them to gain more weight. This is really, really common. It happens in women as well, but this is something that we commonly see with patients, and that are motivated to get healthier. They're trying to do all the right things, but they're not getting better. And this is a very common thing to occur. When we're looking at this piece, I'm interested in, again, how many fats, proteins, carbs they're eating. If it's not, if they're not doing it, if they're not eating enough, then we usually have them work with a nutrition coach that we personally work with. We're interested in food sensitivities. So are they having any reactions to food such as gluten, dairy, all those things? And then if we're talking about optimization, then I'm interested in their micronutrients. Are they getting enough micronutrients in general? And that leads to us assessing cell function, which is one of the last ones that we're going to talk about. But those are macronutrients and food sensitivities are big, because those can be big barriers to people not feeling great overall. If you're not eating enough fat is one of the places that we derive and that we can create hormones from. And so if you're not eating enough fat, that actually impacts your hormone production. If you're eating too many carbs or too little carbs, that can actually impact hormone production as well as protein. So knowing those things are going to be really important. And like I said, Ken did ketogenic diet, intermittent fasting, other fad diets, and then he was taking high quality supplements for the nutrition part. Another thing that we look at is sleep evaluation. So trouble falling asleep, staying asleep, and then do they wake up feeling rested? This is really important. Sleep is a massive contributor to what your testosterone level is. If people are having trouble with having, or people are having poor sleep and they're not sleeping really well, that actually decreases their testosterone significantly, to the point where, let's say in Ken's case, he's, at his age group, he should be around 800 testosterone. If he doesn't sleep well, that could drop it down to 300, something like that. Whereas if he gets a good night's sleep, then he can be back at that 800. If you don't sleep long enough, like, if you have poor sleep for too long, for too many consecutive days, weeks, etc., which is very common, that is just going to tank your hormone production. And so that's going to be something really important that we need to assess. And so if sleep is an issue, then we do pay attention to that and start addressing that as well. And then the last thing that we look at is hormones. And so I'm going to dive in a little bit more on this one. With hormones, what we're interested in is, do they have thyroid hormones? Do they have, what's the status of their thyroid hormones? What's the status of their sex hormones, and status of cortisol? If you have a low cortisol production, you can also have low testosterone and low thyroid hormone. If you had low thyroid hormone, you can have low testosterone production. And this is where, when people don't do a proper workup, where stuff gets missed, because you can have a guy who's fatigued and doesn't have energy throughout the day and has to take a nap in the mid-afternoon, that has a good testosterone level. But because the clinic is stuck on giving testosterone therapy, they put him on this, and sure, the guy feels better to some degree, but they're still tired in the afternoon. If they're tired in the afternoon, that's usually a cortisol problem. And so if you can go and fix cortisol, let's say your testosterone wasn't low, or it was barely low. If you can fix cortisol, then that oftentimes reflects in testosterone improving as well. And so those are different things. Like, each of these categories interact with each other and can impact each other. So if we don't properly assess these, then something can go missed, and you can still not be 100% where you're feeling super great. And so we need to pay attention to those. In Ken's case, Ken had TSH of 1.46. So this is his brain signal to his thyroid to produce T4. So this is what his thyroid produces. And then in the blood, it converts to T3. And in those cases, the T3 is the active form of thyroid hormone. So we're interested in each of these things. The other thing we're interested in thyroid is what his ratio of T3 to reverse T3 is. And reverse T3, so T4 converts to T3 and reverse T3. And reverse T3 is an inactive form of T3. So if you have this ratio out of whack, you can still technically have hypothyroidism or low thyroid function, but your TSH won't reflect that. And oftentimes doctors won't look at all of these things. They'll only look at TSH. In this case, we see that Ken has a good TSH. It's within range. But here, if we look at his ratio, he actually has hypothyroidism, but we wouldn't have seen it within these other labs. And it's because reverse T3 rarely ever gets measured. And so in this case, we want him to be above 0.2, and he's at 0.18. So he has a very small amount of hypothyroidism. LH and FSH are produced from the brain, and they go to your testes to make testosterone. And then testosterone converts to estrogen. You can see here, LH, FSH are within range, but his testosterone's 206. It's really low. And estrogen's fine. It's at 20.6, but it shouldn't be at 20.6 when testosterone's at 206. This ratio is off as well. So we'll want to improve this. We'll want to improve this. And then his cortisol was good. He was at 15.1. You want to be around 16 in the morning. So this one was good overall. But so he has a thyroid problem, he has a testosterone problem. Now, just as a summary, or sorry, when we're looking at his results here, what we're interested in is let's pay attention to what how he improved here. So this is us tracking progress. So we selected a therapy for him, and we put him on a medication called clomiphene. And the reason we did that is because we were interested in going and increasing his testosterone. But since he's really young, I didn't want him to become dependent on testosterone therapy. So we use a medication called clomiphene to actually improve his testosterone. And we can see that it did that here. So he went from 206 in November to 530 in December to 666, 685, 856. During this time, he's been on the same dose of clomiphene, which again is a medication that naturally stimulates his own testosterone production. So he's had an increase here, and part of the reason why he can stay on the same dose and still have an increase is because he's also lost a lot of weight. We paired him with a nutrition coach, and with that nutrition coach, he lost. I think by this point in August, he was down 60 pounds, so 60. And so he lost a bunch of weight. When you lose a bunch of fat tissue, you can produce testosterone better. You're not making as much estrogen anymore. And so you saw his testosterone numbers go up here. If we look at his small LDL particle, which is the one I'm the most interested in, he went from 1904 to 897 within a few months period, November to February. And then he went on vacation, so it went back up. So he didn't care about what he ate on vacation, which is fine. That's cool. And so he went up again, but then now back in August, so from April to August, he came back down to 744. So drastically improved his risk for cardiac disease. You'll see that here as well. In his, in his cardiac inflammation, he was at 3.77, which is really high, went down to 0.71. On vacation, went up to 1.22, which is average. That's actually still really good. And then after that, went down to 0.82, which is fantastic. Insulin as well, 19.2, 7.1, went up in vacation 20.7, and then 8.6. He just parties hard on vacation. So yeah, that's why you see all the increase in these numbers. Then you'll notice here, his weight went from 290 to August, he's at 228. And then his energy went from 510 to 5 out of 10 to 9 out of 10. So those are all improvements that we saw with him. And that was literally going and using that approach that we just went over. So we addressed his nutrition, we addressed his sleep, we optimized his hormones, and we did his hormones very middle of the road. I didn't go and do a very aggressive hormone treatment on him. And just with those three things right off the bat, we were able to get him these results in less than a year. And so the approach that we use, we've seen it time and time again help men achieve their goals. Yes, hormones are important. And when we're looking at the hormone aspect, again, you have two complete ends of the spectrum where people don't believe that they're safe. Others think that they're too safe and they overdose. We have a bunch of solutions that are very middle of the road, and we base how aggressive we treat or how conservative we treat on what the patient's goals are long term and in the short term, and then we go and work from there. So there's times when we use medications such as clomiphene. There's times when we'll give people straight testosterone therapy. There's other times where we'll just have them work on weight loss, sleep, and exercise, and we can see improvements with that. If they do all those really well and they're still not improving, then we can go and be a little bit more aggressive on treatment. But again, this is all based on the patient's timeline. The person that wants to feel better now is going to realistically get clomiphene, testosterone, something like that to improve their levels so that they feel better sooner, rather than the person who is willing to wait 3 months and do really good at nutrition, sleep, and exercise in order to improve their health overall. And they can wait 3 months down the road and are willing to do that to feel good. And so we really work with helping the individuals who just overall want to feel better and get better and not experience that fatigue, not experience low libido, that brain fog, all those things. And so that's what our approach allows us to do. And again, the biggest thing is making sure we have we understand fully what's going on, doing the proper assessment, understanding the goals, tailoring the treatment to the patient, and then the most important thing is tracking progress. We track progress every 3 months, and that's important for us because I don't want patients to go 6 months, where we say, okay, Ken, see you in 6 months, and then 6 months later, so hey Ken, how are you doing? They come in for their appointment. How you doing, Ken? Oh, I've been feeling like crap the last 4 months. Like I'm not getting better. So okay, well that would have been nice to know 4 months ago because we could have helped you with that. So we're checking every 3 months to make sure that that you're improving and that everything's moving forward. And that's how we work to help people or help men achieve those goals. So can you benefit from this approach? We'd love to be able to help you answer that question if that's something that you're considering. We do free 15-minute consults here at our office, and I'm happy to sit down, chat with you, again, understand what your goals are, what you've been through. That way we can really figure out, hey, is this going to work? And are we able to help you and move forward from there. So that's everything I have for today. I'm happy to take any questions. I didn't get too technical into a lot of the hormone side because I wanted to really show the approach and just some general considerations, but I'm happy to go and do a more in-depth hormone one if anyone's interested in doing that. But yeah, I'm happy to answer any questions anyone might have. Olivia, I'll give it back to you.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Dr. Matt, for hosting this webinar. And thank you again to everyone for joining us today. We'll take a few minutes to answer any questions you may have. If you have any, definitely type them into the chat. We'll be sure to get to them. If you do have a specific question pertaining to your personal care, I just highly recommend scheduling a free 15-minute consultation with Dr. Matt. He'll be able to answer that question for you and help you to navigate treatment options. So you can give our office a call to set up an appointment. Our information is listed in the chat below as well. Also, just want to take a moment to remind you guys, Dr. Matt is the host of a really awesome podcast, the Ethos Athletes podcast. So if you like what you learned today, I highly recommend checking out the podcast episodes that we have. I also link that down in the chat below. He's got a ton of several different topics. If you're looking for a specific one, I can definitely find that one for you and get that back over to you. It looks like we had a question pop up, so thank you for sending that over. Question is, what about caffeine dependence? How does that play a role?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So thank you, Jeremy, for asking that. So caffeine dependence is really important in addressing with people. So there are individuals like my wife, Dr. Alex, who will not give up her coffee for anything. So in those instances, totally get that part, and we can work around that. But when we're talking about caffeine dependence, this is where individuals need to go, and correct me if I'm wrong, Jeremy, this in general, when people are talking about caffeine dependence, it's when individuals are being dependent on coffee, energy drinks, et cetera, to kind of give them the energy they need to get throughout the day. That is a good short-term solution for people, and until they start to crash and they start to become more dependent on the caffeine and the amount of caffeine they drink. Oftentimes, when you're needing that amount of caffeine, it's usually because your cortisol production has drastically dropped, and you're having really low cortisol production. Again, really low cortisol production will go and cause an issue with testosterone as well. And so if you have low cortisol production, you likely also have low testosterone production. You may even have a thyroid problem as well. So if you're having, in the chat, if you're drinking a bunch of coffee in the morning and then doing energy drinks in the afternoon, et cetera, and you're still tired, it's usually going to be an imbalance from those. So oftentimes what we do is work to give you, assess the labs to see where the problem is. If it's a cortisol problem, we work on addressing cortisol. Oftentimes that can be, we'll go and do a short and a long-term plan for that. So we'll help increase cortisol production, or give you hydrocortisone to take at a low dose. That way we can increase your cortisol production so it helps your energy. But then we're also working on how do we improve your cortisol production in the long term so we can get you off of that medication or supplement as well. And then looking at testosterone, if it's gone so far as to impact testosterone, that honestly works in your favor, because if you also have low testosterone in addition to low cortisol, your energy is really realistically bottomed out. And so if we can go and increase testosterone, which is we can do a lot quicker and a lot easier than cortisol, then you're going to feel a lot better. We can decrease your caffeine intake, which will then allow your cortisol production to increase and improve as well. And so those are different ways we could go about that. But caffeine dependence is definitely something we've seen a lot of people come in with, where they're constantly drinking coffee, energy drinks, etc., and they're still exhausted all the time. And so those are all really common things that can happen with that. But we can address those for sure. Any other questions that
was a great question. Does anyone else have any other ones? So there's a question that popped up. Would the labs you showed indicate the amount of blockage you have in the arteries?
Oh, great question as well. So the labs won't show us specifically. Well, actually, there's a two-part question. So the labs that we showed in Ken's case gives us an idea of the risk of his ability to create to show any kind of blockage or develop any plaques. There is another lab that we can run that's called an oxidized LDL. An oxidized LDL tells us how much of that cholesterol, essentially, or LDL particle, has actually turned into a plaque. So that we can go and measure with a lab. If we wanted to see the percentage of blockage, that's an imaging that we would order. And it's a CT scan that you would do of the carotid artery. And that gives you an idea of what percentage of blockage you have in the carotid artery. And then you can use an algorithm to give a rough idea of what everything else looks like based on that. And so it is possible to look at how much plaque buildup you have with the oxidized LDL. And then if you really want to get a percentage of blockage, then you could do the CT scan of the carotid artery, and that'll give you an idea of what to look for there, or what percentage you have there. Great question.
Yeah, that was a really great question again. I'll leave it open for a couple more minutes if anyone else has anything they'd like to add in. Anyway, in summary, I hope you really did learn something new about all those aspects, men's hormones and wellness overall. And if you take anything away from this webinar, I hope that you understand that if you are experiencing, low energy, brain fog, weight gain, or any other concerns in your health, you don't have to live with it forever. And if you're looking to optimize your health for longevity, there is also a physician out there who will take the time to understand your situation and work with you to create a solid treatment plan that's best for you and your lifestyle. So thank you again for everyone for joining us tonight. We look forward to connecting with you soon, and I hope you have a great rest of your week.
Awesome. Thank you, Olivia, for hosting everything. We appreciate it.